Now that we are familiar with the data, its visualization, and its structure, I want to introduce one of the most important and fundamental concepts in OSM, which is the cost of data. And I would like to do that with an example. In this case, our example is going to be distance from the physical barriers. Let's visualize that. Imagine that I would be traveling from this point at this corner to this point at this corner. So these 2 points are directly visible from each other, and not only that, I can physically access them directly too. But would I be taking a direct line to go from this point to this point? Probably not. Why not? Because I would also like to keep my distance from the barriers, and in that scenario, I would be walking too close to the barriers. If I want to make a compromise in a way that I would be traveling from this point to this point, making the path lengths as short as possible and being comfortable during the walk, during the travel, I would probably make a slight detour and take a slight curve, which makes things more balanced at the end and makes me more comfortable. So what does that mean? That means that a data that I have is actually has an implication. The implication of data is that uh, it will explain that I would be feeling comfortable or uncomfortable with relation to the data. And this explanation needs to be done with a cost function. A cost function is responsible to transform the numeric value that we have attributed to the data at each point to a to the undesirability that the data may bring with it. So let's say that we have like three different types of data for this point. Um, all of them are in terms of distance. We may have temperature. We may have mm, light intensity, which are explained with Fahrenheit, Celsius, or candles. There are different units, and those numbers are not very meaningful unless I have a mechanism to translate them into the way that I feel in relation to them. And then the cost function that I attribute to each layer of data is a mechanism of making that data meaningful, and is a mechanism that I will understand what that data means in terms of desirability and undesirability. So for each layer of data, uh, I have a I have a cost function associated to that, and I can visualize the cost function. For instance, for the data that you can see on the background, I have this cost function which says that okay, the closer that you get to the barrier, so this is zero distance from barriers, the more uncomfortable I would be feeling. And um, I have uh, I have a way of changing the cost function. I can write a formula for that. I can use the raw value, uh, which means that the cost would be equal to the data itself, and this is like x equals to y identity function. And then I can write a formula for that. So in this case, I'm using this formula, and this is the identity function, and I'm using this formula. And then this one explains how I would be feeling with respect to the data. You can see that I can change that, and all of the things will be updated here. And I can parameterize this data, which I will be explaining later. And then I can use interpolation. I can select a bunch of points and create a cost function, or I can use built-in repulsion. Built-in repulsion is actually available for only these three types of data that I will get when I create the OSM environment, and it will look like this, which is already parameterized. And before I get into the description of the parameters and parameter settings within OSM environment, I want to show you that we can visualize the data in uh, much the same way that we can visualize the cost in much the same way, the way that we can visualize the data. And in order to do that, we have to only check this box, and then the data cost will be visualized for us. And we can also do that in 3D in a very similar way. So we just need to check out this box, and the cost of data will be visualized for us instead of the data itself. You can see that the cost is actually much higher when we have the barriers, and uh, the cost is actually much lower when we are away from the barriers. So being close to the barriers is increasing the costs.